The security guard at the entrance of Meridian Interiors on Osu Oxford Street in Accra moved into the doorway at 11:09 on a Saturday morning when he saw the man coming and did not move back. The man was 63 years old, and he was wearing a pair of brown trousers with a crease ironed into them and a short-sleeved shirt the color of dry sand that had been washed so many times the collar had softened at the edge. He was carrying a blue nylon bag with the logo of an Accra supermarket printed on the side. His shoes were black leather, flat-soled, recently polished. The kind of polish that comes from a cloth and effort rather than a brush and product, and which gives a shoe a particular matte dignity that is different from a shine and better than one. He walked the way a man walks when he has been walking on his own terms for 63 years and sees no reason to change the pace. The security guard, whose name was Franklin and who wore a white shirt with the Meridian logo on the chest pocket, looked at the trousers, looked at the nylon bag and said, "Good morning, sir. Are you here for the warehouse sale?" There was no warehouse sale. The warehouse entrance was at the back of the building on a different street. Franklin knew this. He was indicating, with the words warehouse sale, delivered with the particular courtesy that makes an insult worse than a shout, that the man in front of him did not belong at the front entrance of Meridian Interiors, which was Accra's foremost interior design showroom and which had on display in its front window a single gray modular sofa that cost 14,500 cedis and a floor lamp whose price tag, in small black numerals on cream card, read 9,200. The man looked at Franklin. He looked at the sofa and the window. He looked back at Franklin. He said, "No, I'm not here for the warehouse sale." He walked through the door. Franklin moved to the side but did not open it for him. That was the first thing that happened that morning. It was not the last. His name was Joseph Ni Mensah Akwa. He was 63 years old and 5'8" and 174 pounds, which was 11 pounds heavier than he had been at 50. When a doctor in a consulting room in Korle-Bu Teaching Hospital had told him he had high blood pressure and had handed him a photocopied diet sheet that he had followed with the same discipline he had applied to everything else in his life for 3 years and which had worked. He had a full head of gray hair, worn close, and a face that had the quality of something that had been tested repeatedly and was still present. He wore reading glasses on a cord around his neck that had belonged to his father, who had been a schoolteacher in Cape Coast for 37 years, and who had died when Joseph was 31 and had left him. Among other things, the glasses and a piece of advice he had written on a piece of paper and placed in the breast pocket of the jacket Joseph wore to the funeral: "Do the work and leave the performance to people who have nothing else." Joseph had kept the piece of paper in a small frame in his study for 32 years. The glass on the frame had a crack in the bottom right corner that he had never repaired. Not because he couldn't, but because the crack had been there since 2003, when the frame fell during the earthquake tremor that shook Accra in August of that year. And the crack was part of the frame now. In the blue nylon supermarket bag he was carrying were 2 pieces of kente cloth folded in brown paper, a measuring tape, and a notebook with a green cover in which he had made detailed sketches of the interior of a room he was designing. He was an architect. He had been an architect for 38 years. His firm, Akwa and Associates, occupied 2 floors of a building on Liberation Road, employed 16 people, and had in the past 4 decades designed or overseen the construction of 41 significant buildings in Ghana, including a public library in Tamale, 3 secondary schools funded by the Ghana Education Trust, a community health center in Bolgatonga, and, most recently, the new wing of a private hospital in East Legon whose main donor, a Ghanaian-British property developer named Sir Charles Owusu Boateng, had insisted on using a local firm rather than the British architectural practice his board had recommended. Joseph had won that commission in a competitive tender. The British practice had submitted a proposal that was 3 times the budget and 6 months longer in timeline. Joseph's proposal had been on time, under budget, and the building had won a regional design commendation from the Ghana Institute of Architects in March of this year. He had collected the award in the same short-sleeved shirts he wore every day, because his wife, Abena, had suggested once that he wear a suit, and he had said, "The building won the award. I just drew it." He was at Meridian Interiors on a Saturday morning because the private hospital donor, Sir Charles, had asked him personally to oversee the interior specification for the hospital's reception area. And Abena, who had a precise eye for materials, had told him that Meridian on Osu Oxford Street was the only place in Accra worth going for the grade of fabric and furniture the commission required. He had a budget of 280,000 cedis for this phase of the project alone. He walked into the showroom. It was large and cool, and arranged with the particular deliberateness of a place that knows its prices and wants you to feel them before you see them. Furniture set in groupings that implied a life rather than a sale. Lighting warm enough to make everything look like it already belonged somewhere. A smell of something faintly floral that was neither too strong nor entirely natural. There were 3 other customers on the floor. A couple in their 40s examining a dining table, and a woman in a white dress and sunglasses looking at a set of curtained fabric samples near the window. There were 2 sales assistants visible. One, a young woman, was with the couple at the dining table. The other, a young man in a dark jacket whose name tag read Selassie, was near the fabric samples wall on the far side of the room. Selassie looked up when Joseph came in. He made a specific decision with his face. Not a bad decision, not a dramatic one, the kind of small social decision that people in sales environments make in under 2 seconds and almost never examine. He looked at Joseph the way you look at something that is not your responsibility. Then he looked back at his phone. Joseph walked to the fabric samples wall and stood in front of it for a moment. He placed the blue nylon bag on the floor beside him. He took out the notebook and opened it to the sketch he had made of the hospital reception area. He began comparing the sketches to the samples in front of him, moving along the wall slowly, lifting a corner of fabric here, holding one against another there, with the focused economy of someone who knew exactly what he was looking for and was prepared to take the time to find it. He had been standing there for 9 minutes when the woman in the white dress finished at the samples and moved away. Selassie, who had been watching the woman in the white dress with the attentiveness of someone expecting a purchase, looked across the room and registered that Joseph was still at the wall and still had the supermarket bag on the floor. He walked over. He stood at a distance of about 4 feet, which is not the distance you stand at when you are offering assistance, and is precisely the distance you stand at when you are supervising. He said, "Can I help you find something?" He said it in a tone that meant the opposite. Joseph turned and looked at him. He looked at the name tag. "Good morning, Selassie," he said. "Yes, I need to see your full range of commercial-grade upholstery fabric. I'm looking for something in the 12 to 15,000 cedis per meter range, flame retardant certified, hospital or hospitality grade." He said this the way he said everything, without decoration and without heat. The precise language of a person who has spent 38 years saying exactly what he means to people who need to understand it. He turned back to the wall. Selassie stood very still for a moment. The specific quality of that stillness was the stillness of a person whose assumption has just been publicly contradicted and who has not yet decided how to reframe it. He said, "Those samples are at the back of the showroom. They're not on general display." He paused. "Do you have an account with us?" "No," Joseph said. "I'm a new client. We typically require an account for commercial orders," Selassie said. "I can give you the account application form." "That's fine," Joseph said. I'll also need to see the full commercial catalog. Of course, Selassie said. If you could take a seat, I can bring someone from our commercial team. The commercial team handles accounts over 50,000 cedis. He said this with the precision of someone drawing a line. What the line meant was, I don't believe you are a commercial account. What the line said was, procedure. Joseph sat down on a display sofa that cost more than the annual salary of the man who had just offered him a seat on it. He placed the blue nylon bag on his lap. He folded the notebook closed. He waited. He had been in this situation before, not always in showrooms, not always about money, but always involving a version of the same calculation someone else made about him in the first 2 seconds, and then spent the next 10 minutes trying to make look like policy. He was not angry. He had passed through angry on this particular journey sometime in his 40s and come out the other side into something quieter and more permanent. The absolute certainty that the calculation was wrong and the patience to let the world demonstrate it on its own schedule. He sat for 11 minutes. Not 10. Not 12. He counted, the way a person counts when they have decided to record something rather than feel it. He watched the couple at the dining table receive the full attention of the female sales assistant. She brought swatches. She pulled out the extension leaf. She adjusted the overhead light for them twice. He watched the woman in the white dress finish at the curtain samples and depart without buying anything, and receive as she left a warm goodbye and the assistant's card pressed into her hand. He watched the showroom move around him like a current moving around a stone. At the 8-minute mark, a second customer, a young man in a polo shirt, early 30s, who came in carrying nothing and who Selassie could not have known with any certainty had money to spend, was greeted at the door and escorted directly to the upholstery section without being redirected to the warehouse. Joseph noted this. He did not react to it. He held the notebook in his lap with both hands and looked at the front window where the 9,200 cedi floor lamp stood in the light. And he thought about the reception area of the hospital, about the proportions of the space and what the light needed to do in it, and he held the thinking steady the way he held everything steady, the way his father had taught him to hold things, which was with both hands and no performance. If this story is sitting with you the way I think it is, stay with me, because what happens in the next 8 minutes changes every person in this room. The woman from the commercial team arrived after 11 minutes. Her name was Dedi, and she had the manner of someone who had absorbed, through proximity to expensive things over a long professional career, a finely calibrated ability to read a room. She read the room in approximately 4 seconds as she walked from the back of the showroom toward the sofa where Joseph was sitting. She saw the nylon bag. She saw the worn shirt collar. She saw Selassie standing 3 feet back with the slight overcomposure of someone who has recently done something he is not sure about. And she saw an older man with a notebook on his knee who was sitting with the stillness of someone who has entirely stopped caring what this interaction costs him. She sat down across from him and said, "Mr. Acquoy," he said. "Joseph Acquoy." "Mr. Acquoy," she said. "I understand you're looking at commercial fabric." "I am," he said. "I need hospital-grade upholstery for a reception area. 12 to 15,000 cedis per meter. Flame retardant certified, ideally with antimicrobial treatment. I'll need to see swatches and lead time information before I commit to quantities." He opened the notebook and turned it toward her to show her the sketch. "The specification is here. I'll also need to see your supplier certification documents." Didi looked at the sketch. It was detailed and confident. It was the sketch of a person who had been drawing buildings for 38 years. She looked at the notebook, and then at Joseph, and the recalibration she made was not dramatic and not apologetic. It was simply accurate. She said, "I can show you everything we have in that specification." Can I ask which project this is for? The new patient wing at East Legon Private Hospital, he said. The Owusu Boatong wing. He said Sir Charles's name in the same tone he said everything else, as information, not as a weapon. Dedi's hand, which had been resting on her knee, did not move, but something in her face completed a sentence she had not started out loud. Selassie, she said, without looking up from the sketch. Please bring Mr. Akwa a tea, and ask Franklin to come in from the door. Selassie went. He came back with the tea first. He set it on the table beside Joseph with both hands, which was not how he had stood 40 minutes earlier when Joseph walked through the door, and which Dedi noted without comment. Franklin came in from the door. He stood slightly to the left of the sofa. Dedi said, "Franklin, this is Mr. Akwa. He is a client. Please make sure his car is attended to while he's with us." Franklin said, "Of course." He did not look directly at Joseph. Joseph looked at him. He looked at Franklin the way he looked at everything, fully and without evasion. Then he looked back at the notebook and said, "Now." The fabric. Dedi spent an hour and 40 minutes with him. She opened the commercial archive. She brought out every swatch in the 12 to 15 range and laid them in sequence on the cleared surface of a display table under a light that was adjusted specifically for color accuracy. She brought the supplier certification files. She brought the lead time sheets. She answered every question he asked with the information it deserved. Joseph asked 13 questions. He had the notebook open on the table, and he took notes in the green cover with a pen he carried in his shirt pocket. A ballpoint pen in a barrel the color of dark wood. Nothing distinctive about it except that he had been carrying it for 8 years and wrote with it the way a person writes with something they have no intention of replacing. When he was satisfied, he closed the notebook and asked for an order form. The total order came to 162,000 cedis, with a second phase pending confirmation that would bring the total to approximately 240,000. He paid a 40% deposit on the spot. He presented a corporate card from Akwa and Associates. Dedi processed the transaction. The machine approved it in 11 seconds. She handed him the receipt and said, "We'll have your account manager contact you by Tuesday. If there's any variation in the lead times, they'll reach you directly." She said, "It's been a pleasure, Mr. Akwa." He said, "Thank you, Didi. You've been very helpful." He picked up the blue nylon bag. He walked to the door. Franklin, who was back at his post, opened it for him this time. Joseph nodded once and walked out onto Osu Oxford Street into the Saturday morning, which was warm and busy and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 2 hours inside the showroom behind him. He did not look back through the window. He had no interest in what the room looked like without him in it. He was thinking about the hospital reception area, about the fabric samples, about the antimicrobial certification, and whether the lead time would clear the build schedule. He had a meeting with his site manager on Monday morning, and he needed the figures confirmed before then. He had work to do. 3 weeks later, the Meridian Interiors area manager, a woman named Patricia, who oversaw 4 showroom locations and whose job included reviewing customer feedback, received a formal client satisfaction report for the Osu Oxford Street location that included a single written comment submitted by Joseph Ni Mensa Akwa and Associates. The comment said, "The commercial team, specifically Dedi, provided excellent service and thorough product knowledge once engaged. The initial welcome process requires review." It said nothing more than that. It was professional and specific and measured, and it was sent as a matter of record, not of feeling. Patricia was familiar with client feedback. She received between 12 and 20 comments a month across 4 locations, and she had, over 9 years of this work, developed a precise ability to read the difference between a complaint that was about a bad experience and a comment that was about a systemic pattern. This was the second type. She also, because it was her job to know this, recognized the project name in the client's firm details. East Legon Private Hospital. The Owusu Boateng Wing. She had been aware of that commission for 6 months. It was the kind of project that moved through the design and interiors industry in Accra with the particular low-frequency signal of something significant. The way a large ship moves through water, quietly and with consequence. She had known Meridian had received the commercial order. She had not known, until she read the comment, what the entry experience of the client had been. She forwarded the comment to the showroom manager that afternoon with a note that read, "Please review the front-of-house welcome process and report to me by end of week." She did not write anything else. She did not need to. A review was conducted. Selassie and Franklin attended a 2-hour customer experience training the following Thursday, which was held in the Meridian staff room on the 2nd floor, and which covered, among other things, the difference between a first impression formed in 2 seconds and one formed over 2 minutes. The training was mandatory. The showroom manager sent a completion confirmation to Patricia. Patricia filed it. The company did not issue a public statement, and no one was dismissed. Which is how institutional correction works when it is done correctly. Not as spectacle, not as punishment, but as a change in what is required from people who are still present and still capable of learning. The Owusu Boateng Wing of East Legon Private Hospital opened 7 months later on a Thursday in November, on time, under budget, and to a reception attended by 41 people, including Sir Charles, who gave a short speech and said, among other things, that the design was the finest work of institutional architecture he had seen in West Africa in 20 years. Joseph was in the room in his short-sleeved shirt. He was standing near the back. Someone from the local press asked him for a quote for the architecture section of their profile on the building. He said, "The building does the talking." The press photographer asked if he could take a photograph. Joseph said yes. He stood in front of the reception area, in front of the commercial-grade, flame-retardant certified upholstery fabric from Meridian Interiors on Osu Oxford Street, in the 12 to 15,000 cedis per meter range, installed precisely according to specification, and he straightened his collar and looked at the camera without smiling, or not smiling, just looking, the way a man looks when he is exactly where the work brought him and needs nothing added to it. Abina, who was standing beside the photographer, said later that it was the best photograph anyone had ever taken of him. He said, "They got the building right. That's all I asked for." Here is what Selassie did not know at 11:09 on that Saturday morning, when he made a decision with his face in under 2 seconds. He did not know the name. He did not know the 38 years. He did not know the 41 buildings, or the commendation from the Ghana Institute of Architects, or the cracked glass on the frame in the study, or the piece of paper in a dead man's handwriting that said, "Do the work, and leave the performance to people who have nothing else." He knew a worn shirt collar and a supermarket bag, and he built a conclusion from those 2 things that was wrong in every direction that mattered. This is not an unusual thing to do. It is, in fact, the most ordinary thing in the world. We are all doing it constantly. Building our understanding of who is in front of us from the fastest, cheapest information available. Because our brains are efficient rather than accurate, and efficiency feels like perception even when it is the opposite. The problem is not that the calculation exists. The problem is that it operates on people. And people are not data. A worn collar is not a history. A supermarket bag is not a balance sheet. The thing that tells you who a person is cannot be extracted in 2 seconds. It takes time, and it takes the specific willingness to suspend what you think you already know, which is harder than any 2-second judgment, and more worth doing than anything that 2-second judgment will ever produce. There is a version of this story where Joseph Aqua did not sit quietly on the showroom sofa. There is a version where he said every word he had earned the right to say. There is a version where he named the 38 years out loud, placed the corporate card on the table in the first 5 minutes, made Selassie understand in real time exactly what the calculation had cost him. That version exists. Joseph chose a different one. Not because the other version was wrong, but because doing the work and leaving the performance to other people was not a policy he held selectively. It was the whole thing. Consider the last time you dismissed someone before they finished their sentence. The last time a bag or a coat or a pair of shoes told you something you decided to believe. The last time you stood at a distance of 4 feet and called it courtesy. What would it have cost you to stay another 2 minutes? To ask one more question? To let the answer change you before you had finished forming it? Leave that in the comments. I want the honest version, not the comfortable one. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.